Hi there, Jonny here from JonnyLipshamStudios.co.uk and welcome to episode 7 of the Studio One from Scratch series, and we're continuing mixing today, so this is mixing part 2. So we have already got pretty good EQ and compression settings on the mix bus, on the percussion bus and the drum bus. So we're going to press on today and we're going to go and check out some bass, some guitar, some keys, and we'll see how far we get in the next sort of 20 minutes or so. I want to try and make this episode maybe just a little bit shorter than previous one. So, alright, let's get to it. So, let's just quickly remind ourselves where we got to. We'll just play a few seconds of this and then we'll get to mixing. Alrighty, I think that sounds pretty good so far. Alright, so let's get into mixing the rest of this. I think pretty much we've got the balances pretty good between the faders over here and the buses and the panning, pretty good. Now bear in mind that pretty much all of the elements of this mix are samples, or they are virtual instruments, like the drums are loops, the congas and tambourine are loops, the bass is a virtual bass, pretty much, and the guitars are loops, the trumpet is a loop. The only thing that I played myself on this is the piano solo and the Fender Rhodes. Alright, so let's go take a look at this particular bass. We've heard it in context. Let's just do a quick check of it in solo and see what it might need. Not that I tend to solo things, but I just want to take a quick check. So let's solo the bass bus. Okay, so we've got some variations there in dynamics. There are some quiet notes and some more attacking notes there. So we're going to use some compression to even that out a little bit and make this bass a little bit more punchy. But let's get to EQ first of all. Now, given that this is a virtual bass, it's not really going to need a whole lot. It's just going to need EQ to make it sit good in the mix. So we're going to turn the solo off. And we're going to take another listen to this, and we're going to have a look at what's on here, and we're going to use our ears more than our eyes, and we're going to try and balance this bass up nice. Alrighty, so we've had a little look and a little listen, albeit not a very long one, for the sake of time. But what we're going to do is I'm going to let you in on a couple little tips for you if you have no idea what to do when you're EQing a bass. There are a few elements that I listen for, that I look to cut, and I also look to enhance. First thing I look to cut is anything that we don't need, anything low that's out of kind of like the human threshold of hearing that we don't really need. So I would use a high pass filter, but not at 75. I would maybe start with it around about 30. And this is basically just going to cut out any low rumble. Like if this for example was a real bass, I would want to cut out things like amp rumble and that kind of stuff that we don't want, and any vibrations coming off the floor that the amp is sitting on. So we want to roll that off. In this case I'm doing it quite gently with a nice gentle 12 dB per octave slope. So It's rolling that off quite nice and subtly. The next thing I want to look for is I want to look for the tone of the bass, the main body of the bass. And then I want to look for things that I want to cut. So like woodiness, boxiness, that kind of stuff that we don't need. I'm going to look for those and I'm going to cut those out. And then that should just leave the tone of the bass, and then we can shape that a little bit. So let's find some of that boxiness that we don't want, and we'll see how we go. Now, as I say, we're probably not rigging it fine very much because this is a virtual bass, so there's a degree to which it's been processed already. So, you know, in a real well setting with your bass going into your DI box or your amp that you're miking up, you're going to want to look for these things. You're going to want to look for kind of this area here, kind of between 350 and 550-ish. Look around this area here for kind of a kind of boxy, cardboardy kind of sound to the bass. This is kind of an area that you don't really want. And then the other thing that you want to find to enhance is look for kind of the tone, the sound of the attack of the pluck of the finger on the string. If it's a finger style bass player, or if it's a plectrum, you want to try and find that. But with the plectrum, you want to be a little bit more subtle because you don't want it to get a little bit click-clacky, which is something you want to avoid. You want it to be nice and round, the enhancement there. But as I say, this has already been pre-processed because it's a virtual instrument, so we might not find quite so much of that. But we'll see. Nothing's really jumping out at me here, I have to tell you. Alright, so let's go find that finger frequency. It'll be up around here somewhere. I'm not really seeing it on the graph here though. Give the bottom end a bit more beef. Not too much. Alright, so as I said, there's not really a whole lot we can do with this particular bass because it's already processed. So basically I'm just looking really to take out what's unnecessary and then kind of enhance a little bit. So finding that little kind of sort of finger attack area, which is kind of around this area here, give that a little bit of a boost, and then a little bit of the body of the bass, give some of the low end a bit of beef. And that's all really I think is necessary on this bass guitar. Alright, so let's move on and we'll get our compressor and we will deal with some of the dynamics of this bass. So we're going to take the low cut, we'll turn it off, we don't need that. So let's go back and see what we can do with this. And we want it to be reasonably slowish attack because we want to allow quite a lot of that finger sound to come through because we want this bass to be nice and punchy, and so we want to set the release time appropriately as well. So let's get to it. Get some compression happening. Okay, so there we go. So that's quite a bit more punchy, actually. If you're not really sure, that's okay. Make sure you're listening to the audio of this video on a good pair of headphones or on studio monitors. And if you're listening on studio monitors, make sure you're kind of sat at that apex of that triangle, so you're in the sweet spot for hearing this. If you're in a treated room, all the better. It's going to help you hear the detail of this mix. If not, don't worry about that too much. Make sure you're listening on a good set of headphones that have got a good flat-ish frequency response, so you're not getting lots of bass boost like lots of headphones tend to do that. Commercially available headphones tend to just give you a high boost and a bass boost, and they're not great for listening to detail in a mix because they are already coloring and altering the sound. So if you've got a reasonably flat pair of headphones, flat sounding, then those are the best. Earbuds, yeah, you're not really going to hear too much in the way of changes. So yeah, make sure you're listening on, I just smacked my hand into the desk, sorry about that. Yeah, make sure you're listening to this on reasonably good speakers or headphones, and you should be able to hear that this bass is definitely a little bit more punchy with a faster release time. So the compressor is letting go quite quickly now, and the attack is 20 milliseconds, a little bit faster than I had it before. I had it set at 30, that's my default, and I just pulled it back a little bit so that the attack is a little bit faster. And it just sounded right to me, having the attack a little bit faster. I don't want it to be too punchy, but punchy enough, and I think we've kind of got that. And then the makeup gain, I use that to kind of balance the input and the output, so that they are at the same volume, so same volume out as in, basically, so that we're making up for the gain loss from the compression. So that is that on the bass. I think that sounds pretty good. As I've said a few times now, this is, an already processed bass sound because it's a virtual instrument, so we're not really going to do very much. We're only looking for just a little bit of taming compression, and that's probably about it really with this. With a real bass guitar, the dynamic range might be greater. The inconsistency of the plucks of whomever your bass player is might be greater, in which case you might need to do a little bit more compression to kind of even that out. Essentially what you're looking to do with a compressor on a bass guitar is you're looking to do two things. Number one, you're looking to make that bass nice and punchy, and you can do that with a slower attack setting. The other thing that you're wanting to do particularly with something like a native compressor like this, which is not going to color the sound at all. It's just very much just a volume controller. It's just going to turn it down where it's necessary to turn it down. What you're looking to do is you're looking to even out the difference between the quieter plucks and the louder plucks, so that you're not having to constantly ride a fader. So that's what you want to try and do here, and you can do that with a combination of the threshold, the release time, and your makeup gain as well. So be using your ears at this point rather than looking at the graph here too much. Now when you're first starting out, you will be wanting to look at this a lot, and I only look at it basically when I'm trying to balance my input and output levels, and I do that, I just eyeball that, to be honest. But yeah, pay attention to this guy here. This is going to tell you how much compression you're getting. If you're getting like 12 dB of compression, you're doing too much. So in this case, because it's a virtual bass and the style of music it is, I only want to do max 3.5 dB, something like that. So those are the kind of things you want to look for when you're mixing a bass guitar. You want to try and even out those quieter and louder plucks, so you've got a much more balanced level performance, even performance of the bass. So that's what we want to do there. So I think we've kind of achieved that, and we've got some punch to it. Alright, let's move on to the guitars. The guitars are very busy. I'm just going to reset that. The guitars are very busy, and again we want to just clear out some space for these with some EQ. So let's get the EQ in, and let's get going again. Alright, so little listen there. I want to clear out this low end. I can see there's quite a lot of low end that we don't need. So let's find that sweet spot. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll this up until it's too thin, and then we'll gradually dial it back until we're happy with it. Going to check this mid-range area. Alright, I don't think there's very much more to do with this, because again, virtual instruments gonna have already been processed to some degree or other. So I'm just basically just cleaning it up, taking out the low end that we don't need, which automatically, you might have noticed, made a lot more space for the kick drum and the bass guitar. So they are starting to come through even more now that we've cleared out the low end of the guitars. And then this was just a ringing frequency I could hear that I just didn't like the sound of. And I found it and just pulled it out just a little bit. Didn't want to pull it out too much to sound unnatural, so just pulled it out by 5 dB at 590 Hertz. So we got rid of that, and I think we'll call that a day for EQ. Compression, we're going to not do very much, to be honest. This is going to be just taming compression. And again, kind of punch, that kind of thing is what I'm looking for here. I don't want everything to be punchy, so I want these guitars maybe to sit back a little bit, because I want to make the piano and the trumpet to have their own space, which we've not got to yet. So I'm going to make these sit back a little, so I might have a faster attack on these. So let's go back to the beginning. Okay, so what you might notice there is that the strumming guitar is coming through quite nice and crisply, and it's got quite a nice amount of attack to it now. But it's not too much. We've dialed this back to 3 milliseconds, keeping the release kind of in the middle, which, to be honest, if you're new to compression, I recommend you keep this guy more or less in the middle. And, you know, at first, don't really change it too terribly much. And basically use the attack and the threshold and the gain to do the vast majority of what you're going to do compression wise. I think I said in the previous video, if you have a faster attack setting, it's going to make the instrument that you're compressing, or the voice that you're compressing, to sit further back in the mix than if it has a slower attack. If you have it with a slower attack, more of the initial sound is going to pass through before the compressor grabs it fully, which means it's going to sound more up front. That's the perceived level that it's going to have in your ears. It's going to sound more up front. So think carefully about what elements of your mix you want to have up front. What are the important elements of your mix? The vocal, if it's a song, or if it's an instrumental track, what are the instruments that are playing the melody, or what instruments are featured in this song. Those are the ones that you want to set with a slower attack time, because you want those to be more upfront. And pretty much everything else, you can dial the attack time back quite a bit so that they sit nice and far back in the mix. Because you don't want everything to be having a slow attack time, because if you have that, then everything is going to be up front and there'll be no front to back depth of your mix. So that's something to think about with compression. So you're using this attack button strategically and not just kind of randomly dialing either a slow or a fast. Slow or a fast attack setting. You're doing it with some strategy. So you're doing a faster attack to set things back in the mix, and a slower attack to have things more up front. And then the release kind of goes hand in hand with that. So by and largely, if you're going to have a slower attack, then you're going to have a faster release. And then if you're going to have a faster, and then the opposite will be true. So a slower attack, faster release, fast attack, slower release. So the two are kind of working in tandem together, and that's how you use these guys to position your track, your whatever it might be, in the front to back aspect of the mix. So if you want something up front, you're going to want that slower attack and faster release. Something further back in the mix, you're going to want the opposite. You're going to want a faster attack and slower release. Okay, so those are the attack and release settings and techniques that I recommend with compression, and it will help you get to grips with compression a lot faster if you apply those principles. Alrighty, so we've got the guitars and the bass looking pretty good. So next thing I'm going to do is Control Save, because we want to save this guy. And the next thing we're going to do is the keys. Okay, let's take a look at the keys bus. Now the keys bus just has the Fender Rhodes going to it at the moment. And we've been going for about 25 minutes, so we're going to wrap this up as soon as we get this guy done. So let's go to, not the binaural pan, we don't want that. We want to go down to Pro EQ. We're going to get that guy on there, and we'll get the compressor on there as well. So we're ready for it. But we'll turn him off for right now, and we'll go into the EQ. And what we want to do here is we want to clear out some of the low ends and some of the low mids, because Fender Rhodes in particular can be a little bit muddy down this kind of 200 to 300 to 400 area. This is where there can be quite a lot of build up here. So we want to maybe have a listen and clear some of that out, and allow some of the upper partials of this particular keyboard instrument to come through. Alright, so let's just do a quick listen. let's go hunting for that mid-range. See what we got up here. Not a lot going on up here. But that's where all the aggression is. And there's nothing up here at all. So we can just yank that out. Okay, let's go back and unsolo this. Alrighty, that'll do quite nicely. Let's go and get this compressor going. Now again, this is something that we don't want to be too terribly upfront. So let's go grab this compressor and move it down. So again, we're going to go for a faster attack, slower release kind of setting. So let's dial this compressor in. And then we'll call it a day, and then we'll do the trumpet and the piano solo in the next video. Alrighty, I think we've got pretty good balances going on there. Let's just do a quick save, Control S for save. And I think we've got some pretty good balances going on there. Nothing is too melodramatically compressed. The Fender Rhodes there is doing kind of occasionally about 4 dB of compression to grab some of those really attacky sounds. But other than that, I think everything else is around about 2-3 dB, which is probably about right for this particular type of music. Don't want to go over crazy with compression, and it's very, very easy to do. Very, very easy to go over crazy on compression. So you want to be careful with the compressor because it's an extremely powerful tool, and can make or break your mix. So I hope this has been helpful for you, seeing how I'm doing this with the Pro EQ and the compressor native to Studio One Professional and Studio One Artist. If you are a Prime user, then in terms of compression you have it a little bit easier, because you just have this guy over here, which I should just bring in and I shall show you. This is the channel strip, and basically it's a 3-band EQ and a compressor, expander built in. Don't worry about the expander, just leave that turned off. You're not going to need this for this mix. And you've got a low cut here, and that's pretty much all you're going to need. So if you want to clear out the low end using the high pass filter like we have done using the Pro EQ, you use this guy and you just roll this up as much as you want. It only goes up to 400 Hertz. But yeah, so that's what you would do, and it's got a set slope. You can't change that. Okay, and as for compressor, you have one knob. You just turn this up to however much percentage you want compressed, and then you have these speeds here. So you got fast, medium, slow, and this is a combination of fast and slow and medium attack and release times. So fast here is very fast. Medium is medium. It says medium, but really it's kind of more like medium fast, and then slow is slow, very definitely. So again, going back to the principles I was talking about earlier, use the slower setting for elements you want up front, use the fast or medium settings for elements you want further back in the mix. And the thing with this EQ, if I just grab a band, if you leave this switched on here, this adapt Q switch on, when you move it up, the higher you boost it, the narrower that Q becomes, which is great because you can sweep around, you can find frequencies that you don't want, and then you can just pull them out. And you can pull them out, again, really quite sharply if you need to, or quite broadly and get a broad, more natural sounding curve at the particular points that you need it. Alright, so this is going to be your tool of choice. You're going to have one plugin. You're not going to need the Pro EQ. You're not going to need the compressor. If you are a Studio One Prime guy and you are just checking out Studio One for the first time, this is your go-to plugin. And then we will get on to reverbs and delays, and we'll finish up the trumpet and piano solo. We'll get them done next video, and then we will get on to reverbs and delays and that kind of thing, and giving this a nice sparkle and sense of presence. Alright, so until next video, bye for now.